The Revolution. At HFY Codex Archives original story. The Galactic Teaching Symposium was held aboard Enlightenment Station, a massive orbital facility dedicated to educational research. 10,000 educators from 800 species gathered every 5 years to share methodologies, debate pedagogical philosophy, and advance the science of knowledge transfer. Professor Kaldas had presented at every symposium for the past 70 years. His papers were always well received, always technically perfect, always utterly predictable. This year, standing beside his human student at the presentation podium, he felt something unprecedented: nervousness. "Are you ready, Ms. Martinez?" he asked. Sarah clutched her notes with white-knuckled hands. She had barely passed Kaldas's course with the minimum acceptable score. She was surrounded by the greatest educators in the galaxy. And she was about to tell them they'd been teaching wrong. "No," she said honestly. "But let's do it anyway." The presentation hall held 3,000 attendees. Beings of pure thought, hive minds with distributed consciousness, artificial intelligences older than human civilization, all of them turning their attention to the podium where a failing student and her professor stood. Kaldas began the presentation, his energy field projecting calm authority. "For 73 years, I have taught at the Galactic Academy. My students have included some of the finest minds in known space. My methods have been proven effective across hundreds of species and thousands of individuals." He paused, letting his field dim slightly. "And yet, I have failed." A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. "I have failed because my methods only work for students who can already grasp the impossible. For those whose species evolved the cognitive capacity to process 17-dimensional mathematics, nonlinear causality, or quantum-entangled consciousness. My teaching is perfect for approximately 0.003% of the galactic population." He gestured to Sarah. "This is Sarah Martinez, a human teacher from Earth. By every objective measure, she should not have been admitted to the academy. Her entrance scores were the lowest in recorded history. She struggles with concepts my other students master in minutes. By traditional standards, she is a failure." Sarah tried not to wince at the blunt assessment. "But," Kaldas continued, "she has taught me something I never learned in 12,000 years of galactic education, that teaching is not about transmitting information to those who can receive it easily. True teaching is about making the impossible accessible to those for whom it should be impossible." He turned to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, please explain to this assembly of the galaxy's greatest educators why you are a better teacher than any of us." The silence was deafening. Sarah stepped forward, her hands shaking. She looked out at 3,000 faces, energy fields, consciousness matrices, all of them waiting for her to justify her presence. She thought about her students back on Earth. 15-year-old kids who struggled with algebra, who thought physics was boring, who didn't believe they were smart enough to understand the universe. She thought about what she always told them: you don't have to be a genius. You just have to try. "I'm not better than you," Sarah began, her voice small in the vast hall. "I'm not smarter, I'm not more experienced, I'm not more qualified. But I teach students you've all forgotten exist." She pulled up a holographic display showing her classroom on Earth. 25 teenagers, most looking bored, some staring at their desks, a few tentatively engaged. "These are my students. None of them will ever come to the Galactic Academy. Most of them won't become scientists or philosophers or leaders. Their IQ scores are average. Their mathematical ability is limited. By your standards, they're not worth teaching advanced concepts to." She switched to another image, one of her students, a girl named Maria, working through a problem on the board. "But Maria here? She asked me once why stars shine. Not the scientific answer, the real answer. Why does the universe work the way it does? That question, that wonder, that desire to understand, that exists in every sentient being, regardless of their cognitive capacity." Sarah faced the audience directly. "You teach geniuses. I teach everyone else. And here's what I've learned: the metaphors you dismiss as imprecise, the analogies you consider crude, the stories you think are unscientific, those are how most minds actually learn. Not all intelligence is about processing 17 dimensions. Sometimes intelligence is about taking something impossible and making it feel possible. She pulled up her stick figure diagram of quantum entanglement. This is how I teach quantum mechanics. I know it's wrong. I know it's simplified to the point of inaccuracy. But it gives students who have never processed abstract physics a framework to begin understanding. From here, we build. Slowly. Imperfectly. But we build. A voice resonated through the hall, Professor Thexnal, a famous Kashan educator who had published 200 papers on optimal knowledge transfer. You advocate for teaching false information to make students feel comfortable with ignorance. No, Sarah said firmly. I advocate for meeting students where they are instead of where you wish they were. I advocate for building bridges instead of walls. I advocate for saying you can't understand this yet, but you will instead of you'll never understand this. She switched to another display showing test results from her classroom over 5 years. These are my students' scores. They're not impressive by your standards. But every single one of these students went from thinking physics was impossible to understanding basic quantum mechanics. Not at your level, at their level. And that matters. Another voice, this one a Mordhac philosopher, but what use is imperfect understanding? Surely precision is preferable to approximation. Is it? Sarah challenged. Let me ask you this, how many species in the galaxy have no representation at the Academy? How many brilliant minds are dismissed because they don't process information the way you expect? How many worlds have given up on advanced science because your teaching methods only work for cognitive elite? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Sarah pressed on. I'll tell you what use imperfect understanding is. One of my former students is now a doctor. She doesn't remember most of the physics I taught her. But she remembers that the universe follows rules, that cause and effect exist, that nothing is truly random. That understanding helps her diagnose patients, helps her think systematically about complex problems. Is that useless because it's imperfect? Kildaz's field pulsed with approval. Sarah was doing exactly what she did in the classroom, meeting her audience where they were, building understanding through narrative and example. Here's my real question for all of you, Sarah said, her confidence growing. Who decides what counts as knowledge? You teach the highest level concepts to the highest level minds. That's valuable. But what about the billions of sentient beings who will never reach that level? Do they deserve no education? Do they deserve no understanding of how their universe works? She pulled up a final image, not data or diagrams, but a photo. Her entire class, smiling, holding up projects they'd created explaining physics concepts to elementary school children. These students will never calculate a 17-dimensional wave function. But they're teaching the next generation to wonder, to question, to believe they can understand. That's not imperfect education. That's the foundation that makes your level of education possible. Sarah stepped back, exhausted, certain she'd just humiliated herself and her professor in front of the galaxy's intellectual elite. The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. Then Professor Thexnal spoke again, but this time without challenge in their voice. I have taught for 300 years. I have never considered that my students, brilliant as they are, represent a fraction of potential learners. Human teacher, you have given me much to consider. Another voice, I have dismissed metaphorical teaching as imprecise. Perhaps I have been mistaken. Another, my species' education system has produced great scientists but failed to educate our general population. We attributed this to genetic limitations. Perhaps the limitation was in our teaching. Kildaz watched as the most brilliant educators in the galaxy grappled with a concept so simple, a human high school teacher had to explain it to them. Not everyone learns the same way, and that's okay. The symposium's final day traditionally featured voting on new educational standards and methodologies to be adopted galaxy-wide. This year, an unprecedented proposal was put forward, the Accessible Knowledge Initiative. Its core principle was simple: advanced knowledge should be adapted for minds at all levels, using whatever teaching methods made understanding possible, including metaphor, storytelling, and imprecise analogies. The proposal passed with 87% approval. But more importantly, something else happened. Educators from 200 species approached Sarah, asking her to help them develop curriculum for average students. Worlds that had given up on teaching advanced science wanted to try her methods. The Academy itself proposed creating a new department, Pedagogical Translation, dedicated to making impossible concepts accessible. And Sarah Martinez, who had barely passed her courses, who had struggled every day, who had felt like a failure surrounded by genius, Sarah was offered a position as founding director. "I can't," she told Kailash as they walked through Enlightenment Station after the symposium ended. "I'm a high school teacher. I need to go back to Earth. My students are waiting for me." "I suspected you would say that," Kailash replied, his field pulsing with warmth. "But consider this, your students on Earth number 30. The students you could reach through this initiative number in the billions. Every world with average minds who deserve to understand their universe." Sarah stopped walking. "But I'm not qualified. I failed most of my courses. I'm not an expert." "No," Kailash agreed. "You're something better. You're a teacher who remembers what it's like not to know. Who understands that struggling doesn't mean failing. Who believes that every mind deserves a chance to understand, even imperfectly." He dimmed his field to a gentle glow. "Ms. Martinez, I have taught thousands of brilliant students. They will change the galaxy with their discoveries and innovations. But you? You might change how the entire galaxy learns. Which do you think matters more?" Sarah thought about her students on Earth. She thought about Maria asking why stars shine. She thought about billions of beings across the galaxy who had been told they weren't smart enough, who had given up on understanding, who had been failed by education systems that only worked for geniuses. "I want to do both," she said finally. "I want to help create this initiative. But I also want to keep teaching my kids on Earth. They need to know that their teacher never stopped believing in them." "Then we'll make it work," Kailash said. "Remote teaching is possible. You can guide the initiative while maintaining your classroom. Build a team of educators who understand what you understand. Train them in your methods." Sarah smiled. "My methods are just explain things in ways people can actually understand." "Exactly. And in 12,000 years of galactic education, no one thought to make that the priority." 2 years later, the Accessible Knowledge Initiative had transformed education across 200 worlds. Advanced physics, complex mathematics, philosophical concepts that had been restricted to intellectual elites, all of it was being taught to average students using adapted methodologies. The results were remarkable not because everyone became geniuses, but because everyone gained understanding. Doctors who grasped quantum mechanics well enough to use quantum medical scanners. Engineers who understood multidimensional space well enough to work on FTL drives. Parents who could explain to their children how the universe worked. Imperfect understanding, maybe. But understanding nonetheless. Sarah still taught at Earth High School. Her classroom was the same, her students were the same. But now, occasionally, she'd have guest speakers via hologram, scientists from the Academy, engineers from other worlds, even Kailash himself, all of them learning how to explain the impossible to teenagers who just wanted to understand why stars shine. One day, Maria, now in her final year, approached Sarah after class. "Ms. Martinez, I got accepted to the Galactic Academy." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. "Maria, that's incredible. They said my entrance scores weren't high enough. But then they saw I'd studied under you, and they wanted to interview me. They asked me to explain quantum mechanics." Maria grinned. "I drew stick figures. And? They said it was the clearest explanation they'd ever heard from a student. They asked me if I'd consider studying to become a teacher. They said the galaxy needs more people who can make the impossible feel possible." Sarah felt tears welling up. What did you tell them? I told them I learned from the best. Maria hugged her teacher. Thank you for never making me feel stupid. Thank you for showing me that understanding comes in all forms. Thank you for teaching me that struggling doesn't mean failing. That evening, Sarah sent a message to Kailash, one of my students just got accepted to the academy. She's going to be a teacher. I think we're building something that matters. His response came quickly, Ms. Martinez, we've already built it. The Accessible Knowledge Initiative has now reached 500 worlds. Billions of students are learning concepts they thought were impossible. All because one human teacher refused to accept that education should only work for geniuses. He paused, then added, You failed my course, Sarah. But you taught me more than I taught you. That might be the most important lesson in education. The best teachers are often the ones who struggle most, because they never forget what learning feels like. 10 years after the symposium, the Galactic Academy erected a monument in its central plaza. It wasn't dedicated to a brilliant scientist or a philosophical genius. It was dedicated to Sarah Martinez, the teacher who barely passed her courses but changed how the galaxy learned. The inscription read, Teaching is not about making the brilliant more brilliant. It's about making the impossible accessible to all who dare to understand. Beneath it, carved in stone from 500 different worlds, was a simple drawing, 2 stick figures, holding hands across a dimensional divide. Imperfect. Inaccurate. Unscientific. And absolutely beautiful. Sarah never saw the monument, she was too busy teaching, both at Earth High School and across the galaxy. But her students saw it. And they understood what it meant, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to change the galaxy. You just have to care enough to help others learn. That night, in classrooms across 500 worlds, teachers used metaphors and stories and stick figures to explain quantum mechanics, multidimensional mathematics, and the fundamental nature of reality. Not perfectly. Not with complete accuracy. But with something more important, the belief that every mind deserves a chance to understand. And in a small high school on Earth, Sarah Martinez stood before 30 students and asked the same question she'd asked for 20 years, Who can tell me why stars shine? Hands shot up across the room. Not because her students were geniuses. But because they'd learned from a teacher who believed they could understand, and who never stopped trying to make the impossible possible.